Welcome to Spotlight, the GEG England podcast, with me, Matthew Harrison.
And me, Peter Reeves. We aim to shine spotlight on the latest education and technology talk and really drive home the latest trends. Welcome. Have we got a name for this, Matt?
The GEG England podcast?
The GEG England podcast, okay.
That's the bit, okay?
Yeah. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the GEG England podcast. With you, as always, Peter Reeves and Matthew Harrison. And today we are welcoming Paddy McGrath and Danielle McKernan.
That's it?
Yep. Who are both from Everway, formerly Text Help. I think that is something that everyone is now embedded in their vernacular there. So Everway, most famously bringing you Read and Write, also Equasio, Orbit No, Clara Reader, and Exam Write Pad. So a whole host of accessibility features and ways of making learning digital. Great to have you on the podcast, Paddy and Danielle. And we'll kick over to a first question. So, first of all, before we dive into the deeper stuff, can you just share with us the most inspiring or surprising thing that you've seen from a teacher or student recently when they're using assistive technology?
Well, I'm going to go. Thanks for having us, Peter, Matthew. Lovely to be here. The irony's not lost on me that at the start of the GEG England podcast, you brought on two Irish people. So that's good. I know we've got stuff to share, guys, stuff to share. But actually, I'm going to defer to Danielle. Just Danielle, because you're obviously as part of the team, you're in and out of schools and doing modelling and working with pupils so much. So I'll chip in a few things after you, but I'll go to you first on this because I know you'll have some corkers.
Yeah, it's like, which one do I pick? It's, as you said, Paddy, it's brilliant that as a former teacher myself, I still have contact with the classrooms and I still get in and work with the students. And I would say probably the feature that we have in the Read and Write tool that really made a huge impact recently when I was working with a student was the Translate Live as you speak. I mean, in the moment, I was working with a student who it completely unlocked learning for them. It unlocked the whole curriculum for them entirely right there in the moment when we were sitting beside that student. The school had phoned me in a panic and said, we have this student new to the country, very little English. They're doing A-levels. They're doing computer science, very high level academic content. We need them between now and May to be ready to sit this external exam. What are we going to do? So just that was hugely inspiring for me to be able to see that schools knew they could reach out to us, that we could support, we could have solutions to their challenges, and then right there to see the child just be able to, with a couple of clicks, access that rich content that was in the academic curriculum and a really high level curriculum material, like lots of very complex terms, lots of complex terminologies that they need to grapple with. And just instantly with one click that it was able to be broken down, they were able to then have those learning conversations with their teacher in their home language. Like they were able to speak freely and demonstrate exactly what they knew because they were smart, like they were really intelligent. And this wee boy, he was working so hard at home in the evenings. And then suddenly the technology just broke that barrier down for him. The teacher then felt that she could have a much better relationship with him because she was able to better support, be able to understand where he was in his learning. Oh, it was transformational. It really was, with just that one click of the feature. And then, of course, we went on and we explored Notebook ALM and all of those. And we were able to, utilize the three bar right in there to be able to have everything translated in the moment and have all of our mind mapping and everything done. But it was just incredible, the difference that it made just by that one feature for that child.
I remember the day you did that, Danielle, because I remember the Google chat that you sent to everybody and how I can't remember the exact words, but you more or less define it as one of the most impactful days of your entire teaching career. And I know you look very young, but I know you've been teaching for quite a long time, Danielle. So I remember that. For me, I suppose I've been fortunate to see sort of loads of different stories where the tools give a voice to students. And a particular one, just when I think along those lines, was, and this was more a journey with a little year 6. So the year 6, so when I first met her, I was challenged with the fact from the teacher, she had selective mutism. How's reading right going to help that? Right, okay, so I can talk about reading and comprehension and understanding and all of those things. And actually on the journey with her throughout the kind of first few months of reading right, what actually happened with that wee girl was she started having increased confidence of using voice notes for her own perspective. So just in isolation, and sort of by the end of the second term that I watched her with reading right, she was partaking in group discussions on voice notes and going backwards and forwards. And just that moment of that one tool that, like, we talk about, oh, it's a great way for teacher feedback, or it's a great way to express your own understanding, actually was addressing a very specific need. And that was a real kind of epiphany moment for me. And look, guys, we're really lucky in what we do, and you guys as well. But like, so many people come up to us and say, I wouldn't have got through my PhD without reading right. You know, I wouldn't have got that GCSE pass without reading right. And so many of those stories. But I do just want to say one more thing on that, which is, it's brilliant to have those examples that kind of drive you on a daily basis. But you see, more than anything, if you said to me, like, what difference does reading right or accessibility in general make? For me, it's just confidence. It's just every time I go in a classroom and I see an increase in confidence and a more of a can-do attitude or a more of a happy attitude with approaching work, like, it just drives me every day to see that confidence, because it can get you so far. And a lack of confidence in your learning or how you learn is such a big thing, and such a challenge. So confidence for me is always the overriding thing, and I see it everywhere. I'm really lucky to do that.
Yeah, I think you summed it up really nicely with giving students a voice is just such an important thing. Yeah, and then it's all about spotlighting, and this is the importance of this podcast, is to kind of spotlight that practice, spotlight what's going on for those pupils, spotlight those, let's say, those amazing teachers who are using tools like read and write in the classroom all of the time to then, I say, support those pupils. I think this leads nicely on to the next question. So Everway's mission is about helping everyone understand and be understood. Can you define inclusion for our listeners and explain why a whole school strategy around this is essential, not just nice to have?
Yeah, I think that's probably the easiest one to answer, but also it can be the most difficult one to embrace in a classroom environment, to be fair, because the recognition, we talk about neuro inclusion as an example, is one of the terms, but I like to focus on inclusion in general. And that for me is just a simple recognition that every one of us is different. If you ask any teacher and you've got 30 kids in front of you, are any one of them even vaguely similar? Well, the answer is going to be no. So why would we expect each of our children to learn the same, the process in the same, to have, the same challenges or barriers to learning? So for me, inclusion is about making sure that we include literally everybody in that classroom. These could be pupils that we want to push further and harder. These want to be pupils we want to scaffold and support. All of these pupils are different. And so when we talk about inclusion, I never want to be thought about like, well, this is inclusion for pupils with dyslexia. This is inclusion for SEND. This is inclusion. There are no labels in our world of inclusion. Inclusion should be a voice for absolutely everybody, and everybody included in their own way. I think we have been conditioned in a way that we think about inclusion as bringing in pupils on the SEND register. And I think we are conditioned to think like that, and that's no teacher's fault at all. That is how the system has made us view things, and we have specialists for that. And I'm not for 1 minute suggesting that we absolutely shouldn't give the utmost help and support to those students. Of course we should, but at the same time, we got to recognize that there's all of those students that sit in our classrooms that mask things very, very well, that hide certain traits. If you take something like dyslexia, we can say, look, there's 5% of the population in our school system is diagnosed with dyslexia, but we're also making rough guesses at the moment based on anecdotal evidence that there's between 17 and 20% either have dyslexia or dyslexic traits. That means there's a huge amount of pupils are masking their reading challenges. So inclusion for me, make sure that everybody is supported, everybody can thrive, and everybody has the tools and the success and the strategies that they need. And it really is everybody.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important as well. I think when we've gone on this journey, it's about realizing that like doing inclusion right is equity, and like for years as a teacher, you get shown that little diagram with the children on the boxes, and you go, I've never quite seen that. Like I hadn't ever quite seen that in the classroom until like we started to think differently about inclusion. And not just because you're here on the podcast, but read and write has massively helped with that kind of direction setting and that kind of shift in culture ultimately towards that thinking for us.
Yeah,
Matt, what I really like about the work that you've done across your trust is the implementation of that whole school strategy, because what you've enabled then is consistency of experience for your learners, and they don't have to ask for the supports. It's just there by default, and they're there you've created that environment of choice, and you've done that because of the leadership and the vision and the whole school strategy that was implemented. It wasn't down to a couple of individual teachers in their classroom having really strong practice. It was a whole trust vision, and that's made a powerful impact.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Thank you for the brownie points.
So I think that
say it as I say it.
I think that really leads us on nicely to the next question, which is Everway are known for being real advocates of universal design for learning. If someone hasn't heard of UDL before, and this is their first time hearing that phrase, can you sum it up for us? And what is that most impactful principle they can bring into their teaching the first thing tomorrow morning?
UDL. The first time I came across UDL, I felt like a lot of teachers feel, which is, here's another acronym, here's something more I've got to do, here's something more I've got to talk about. And I push back against a little bit, but purely on that basis without understanding it. But when you get to understand UDL, like at its very core for me, it's about how do I, as a practitioner, remove as many barriers to learning as possible in my classroom. And it presents itself with what can be a very complex and in some cases a very simple framework that you can follow. And that framework broadly falls into three different areas that we should advocate for: multiple means of engagement. So how do we engage all of our pupils in individual ways? Multiple means of representation. How do I take the content that I have and make it flexible to understand it? And that could be as simple as, how do I create more imagery within that to illustrate it? Or it could be, how could I make it culturally relevant? Or it could be, how do I have it in an alternative format, like listening to it rather than actually reading the words on a page? And how at the very end then, how do we look at assessment, for example? So how do we provide pupils multiple means to demonstrate their learning? So ultimately it sounds like it's very flexible, and it's a platform that can, or a framework I should say, to help us remove those barriers. There are two challenges with it when I say it that way, because that kind of assumes that teachers are going to have to go out and figure out what all the barriers are, and that's not what UDL is about. UDL is about how do we reduce as many barriers, because you're never going to know what barriers people face. And then some of the misconceptions around it are, for example, well, I just use technology for this, and actually ultimately no, because it's really about how do I approach learning design and remove as many barriers before I start. And then how do I move to an approach which is goal-based? So ultimately we're all going on the same trajectory, but we all have different paths to do that. And so UDL for me, I would advise people not to think about it as another thing to do. I would advise people to think about UDL as, well, what does good practice look like for me? And it will surprise you how many good things you're doing in your practice that actually adhere to the principles. And I suppose on that like people say, well, how do you move from, right, that's great, Paddy, that's a framework, that's checkpoints, that's a list, that's removal of barriers. How do you move to that next step? What's my actionable thing? And for me, it actually comes down to something super simple, which is choice. If you take something like, and I am going to use Read and Write for this one, but if you can imagine the Read and Write toolbar, lots of buttons on there, simple as that. But therefore, lots of different ways to engage with learning. So do I want to type things? Do I want to help with word prediction? Do I want to speak? How do I want to engage with learning? Ultimately, my advice to all educators is think about how you can empower your students to have the choice to use a tool or a strategy. It doesn't have to be that. And empower them to actually make the choice. UDL for me is a lot about choice and voice. It's about you expressing yourself as a learner and saying, well, I want to use that tool because that helps me in my way. That helps me understand. That helps me express. That helps me interact with the content or the learning. So that for me is a good piece of guidance. But always look at the very simple pieces of UDL. UDL is ultimately about removing barriers and giving choice and voice to students. Danielle, anything to add to that one for me?
Yeah, no, just to can answer Peter's second part of his question there, like, how do you get started? If you wanted to begin with it, what's the first thing, or what's the easiest kind of into it? And I would definitely say it's representation. So thinking at the start about how your materials are presented to your learners, and just being really aware of the barriers that they may present, and thinking, for example, of what your aim is, as you said, Paddy, like it's about the goal. And if the goal is present learning materials because you want the learners to engage with it, to be able to think about the content and to have meaning making opportunities, to make those changes in long-term memory, well then does the actual vehicle of how you get that content into your brain really matter that much? You know, so thinking about representation, thinking about offering the material in audio format, offering students to be able to access it through reading, but reading perhaps with tracking, and just making sure that it's available in multiple ways that the student can actually access, process, and understand it. So like there's so many tools out there at the minute as well to support this in the moment. But I think for a teacher, representation, so thinking about how are you presenting the learning to your students, and what are all the different ways that you can actually do that to break down barriers, is a great first step.
And I think you always got to remember that you're doing that before the learning happens in a lot of cases. You know, sometimes there's those, I'm sure you get it as well, Danielle, people go, what's the difference in that and differentiation, you know, or adaptive teaching? And you kind of get into those conversations. But ultimately UDL is right, well, how do we start from the beginning and remove as many barriers from the get-go, as it were?
Yeah, I did a training the other day and I said to someone, are we asking students to show their learning, or are we asking students to show their learning in a way we expect them to and want them to? That is the big difference there. And there is a massive difference between those two things.
And with it, it's always a balance between, like, you know, getting it right, it just being a gimmick as well. I think that's really, like, would be something that you kind of get hung up on a little bit for some schools and some developments as well. I think, again, it's kind of perfectly what you alluded to at the beginning, like, you know, you go into it a bit uncertain, but then as you start to, you know, unravel it, you know, for us, you know, we found as we started to look at what UDL actually meant, we're going, hold on, we're doing that. Like, it was kind of there already.
I think a lot of people, you're right, man, a lot of people are afraid of UDL. You know, there's a lot of UDL experts out there, and the challenge is you can get bogged into this framework. And if you've had a look at the framework, there's so many checks and balances, and they're all brilliant. They're all very good. But actually, to understand how they relate to your everyday practice is at best a bit of a stretch. I think you have to see, you know, good practice in place. You have to recognize it in your own practice, and you have to see it modeled to actually make the link there. But Peter, you know, you said there about, you know, that assessment piece. You're absolutely right. If you just provide students with some choice there within that, you know, ultimately you have to make an adaptation to what you do to understand, well, how do I assess all of these? And there's a bit of work in that, clearly. But to give them that flexibility ultimately is where it's at. And those are not massive changes we're asking anybody to make.
Yeah, perfect. So it kind of wraps nicely into the next bit anyway. Again, like, you've seen countless schools go down this UDL movement, whether it's UDL, whether it's inclusion, but obviously the biggest kind of factor that we need to get right as educators is the CPD with it, the professional development. So from your point of view, where have you seen that successful? What have been like the biggest wins to, I want to say, get that professional development right?
Yeah, I'll chip in with a couple, but Danielle is absolutely the expert in this because she's led so many UDL implementation projects across the UK. But two quick things for me. Where I've seen it go well is when culture and senior leadership buy-in is there. And like, forget about CPD and how we model that and how we share good practice. Now, all of those things. Culture is the most important thing. I'm working with a very large group at the minute, a country level group at the moment, and I got some feedback from them today saying the one thing that all of our schools are asking for is support with changing the culture in schools and the leadership. And that is the same no matter where you go in the world. If you don't get that culture out of understanding why is inclusion important and what is UDL, then it becomes a challenge. And I know in both of your cases you'll have that inclusive culture created. I think that's really important. But then the other thing, and this is more about Danielle than it is about anything, is that the greatest impact I've seen for UDL to happen is when we model it in the classroom. You see, when we model it, and obviously then when your peers model it in your own school environments, that's when it makes a difference. For me, it's always about that link of theory to practice. And once you see it modeling and you can see it real world, you can understand how it fits and the impact it has, I think you go away. And then all of the other things, of course, come with it. How do we share good practice, and how do we share stories, and and how do we make sure everybody's included? All of those things are part of a good CPD. But for me, culture first, and then the classroom modeling thing and UDL above all is essential. I don't know if you agree with that, Danielle, because I know you're genuinely at the coal face on this, and you're doing a lot of this work.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree that the vision needs to be there from the leadership, and leadership, for example, offering time for colleagues to work together to be able to drive practice forward. And within schools are such busy environments, and there's so many competing demands. So once leadership make it a priority, then change can really truly happen. And without that buy-in, it can be very difficult to make any sort of change within a school. So absolutely, vision has to be there. Leadership has to be in place to be able to drive forward that transformation that we're looking for. And then absolutely, you need those folks within the school who are the champions for inclusion and can really showcase that really strong practice and then model it for others. And as a Google coach myself, I really believe in coaching programs and meeting everybody where they are in terms of their professional learning journey and having conversations that are wrapped around a PedTech approach. So for practitioners, what they want to do is look at their current practices and look at where, for example, the really strong teaching and learning pedagogy can be up-leveled with inclusive practice built in and amalgamated. And that can happen then through those conversations and through sharing practice sessions. And once teachers, and particularly if we look at those models of implementing change in schools, we have the laggard category. But once laggards and those late adopters see the impact it can have on a learner, then suddenly adoption will accelerate. And I believe then you need all of those different types of people in a school working together. But exactly as Paddy said, it's got to be driven from the leadership at the top to be able to enable all of those pieces to fall into place.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it is a cultural shift, definitely I think is the key there. I think how I've seen it evolve recently is when leadership allows them freedom as well. So I think our schools have been particularly successful where the heads have allowed the classroom practitioners to try things and try these new ideas and go, oh, we're going to go down this route with inclusive practices or UDL. But we're looking at, but it's still, I say, they're still supported by leadership and it's still driven by leadership, but driven in a very hands-off approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, Matt. Yeah, it's like whenever I was doing digital transformation in the school I worked at, I used the Noster model, where you have all of the different components of vision and then the actual resources and the everything that you needed to be able to achieve success. But what I found was that within our short-term planning, you also needed to provide space for the innovators, like that group that you're talking about, to take risks. Because even though you'll have your short-term plans and you want to stay focused on those plans and not distracted on all the new shiny tools that you see out there, because you want to get really true deep embedment of the tools, but you still need, as you said, Matt, that innovation forum, that group in there to be able to then be ready to take risks and to try things out and then to see what's worth actually embedding in future plans. So you're always moving forward and innovating in your school.
Yeah, and I think if you get the right innovative teacher, I say I always call it the teacher that everybody sees themselves as, almost like you want that kind of that model teacher almost. Then like it kind of naturally like bleeds out from that one kind of
For sure.
Yeah, I think that freedom as well to try it, make mistakes and learn from your mistakes. Too often, I think, especially around technology decisions, we're trying to prove something has worked rather than seeing if something is working. And they're two different things as well. And it's just having the freedom to look at it, adapt and move forwards is massive in those circumstances. Yeah. So, changing tact a little bit here. Thinking about assistive technology, I've got a two-part question for you. First of all, what is the biggest myth that you'd love to debunk about assistive tech? And then secondly, off the flip of that, what is a hidden gem for you in assistive technology or a read-write product? That thing that maybe people undervalue or underplay? Because I've got my own one from read-write in particular that I think is slept on, that I'll come to at the end. But I'd love to know where you are coming from on that.
I can't wait to hear it, Peter.
No, yeah, it's just super exciting. Yeah, it's great.
That's the suspense now. I'm going to get my answer done really quickly so I can get to Peter's.
I think we won't tell him ours, Danielle. I think we'll just hold it for Peter's one. See, it's going to be a big one. Either that, or we're going to completely spoil his recording at this point, and we're going to both stay the same.
Paddy, I hope we don't pick the one that he goes for first.
Well, your first part, Peter, was sort of the biggest myth. I suppose two things on that. And look, I've already said this, but I can't sort of beat the drum loud enough on this one. One of the things that annoys me and so guys, I'm head of education for Everway, so it's decent enough we job, but it's a large company, and we are the largest specialist assistive technology company in the world. Why am I telling you that? Because the thing that annoys me most is the words assistive technology. That's the sphere I live in, because my view has always been the technology of its very essence is assistive, and each to their own in lots of different ways. And so I'd love us to mainstream assistive technology, as we all refer to just technology, and that's standard course. We've got accessibility tools built in there. We've got multiple means and UDL tools built in there. But I know we've got to give it a label. But what's the one myth? The one myth is that when you label it with assistive technology, you automatically label it for a subset of your students, right? And that's the big problem for me. And you guys will know a line that I repeat very, very often, which is necessary for some, useful for all. I use it everywhere I go because it is the one thing that clicks with people really well, because people go, I get that now. This is useful for absolutely everybody. And I know it was more useful and more dependent maybe for some of my students, but that's the big myth for me is that assistive technology or technology such as we do at Everway with things like read and write is only for a subset of students. The worst calls we get, and you guys know, of course, we're a commercial company. We have a sales team. So people phone looking to buy things. And what they phone and look to buy is, hello, I have 10 pupils with dyslexia in my school of 1600. I would like 10 copies of your read and write, please. And I tell the team, the standard answer to that is, no, thank you. Because if that's the case, then all we're doing is reinforcing that stigma of this piece of technology is only for these pupils. And all you do is self-perpetuate the label. So that's the one thing I'd love to change, and that's the myth. Favorite tool? Then let's not steal Peter's thunder here on this. There are so many tools within read and write that I particularly love, but I think Simplify for me is a very simple tool. And why in that when I show it and when I see pupils use it, it's so powerful, because actually if I want to level text, or I have a visual impairment and I simply need bigger font, or I'm struggling with the line heights, for me, it takes this web page and it just turns it into something completely different. It's uniquely customized and personalized to me. So I think it's like a hidden gem and people forget about it. There's so many buttons in read and write that people forget about, like practice reading aloud, encouraging people to read aloud. There's so many. I'm going to keep going through them, Danielle, until I get the page. That was my one. But no, for me, Simplify is my little gem. But there are many of them, and there's a lot of Easter eggs in there too. Danielle?
That wasn't mine, thank goodness. There's the relief there on my face, I'm sure. Yeah, for me, I think I completely agree with you, Paddy. The biggest myth is the fact that these tools are targeted to specific users, and actually what we know is what's good practice for students with SEN is actually really strong practice for all learners. And in particular, where I've seen the tools being used very impactfully is when teachers model the assistive technology tools right from the front of the room and use it in their whole class PedTech practice. So my hidden gem, and one thing I saw very recently that just wowed me in the school in Tower Hamlets, was the use of the screen masking. And I think it's a real hidden gem because it's such a versatile tool. You can use it as a reading ruler for sentence level reading. You can use it for paragraph level reading. The teacher I saw in Tower Hamlets used it for choral reading in the classroom. So she had it on the board, working her way down, and everybody was tracking and following the piece of text that the whole class was reading aloud. And, so it's such a versatile tool, really powerful, and it's probably one of the most popular features for students whenever they access it. Mm-hmm. I also think it's really important to show those tools to our students whenever they're engaging in digital texts, because we know there's a lot of research showing that perhaps paper reading is better, that deep reading happens more naturally with paper. But we're living in a digital world, and we have digital text that we need to manipulate and use and understand and be able to use digital text. And the screen masking tool, to me, is a wonderful resource to be able to teach digital reading, because what it's doing is it's removing that problem of reading on the screen whereby your eyes are tracking down too quickly and not processing the text. Suddenly, when you put your screen mask on, what you're doing is you're overcoming that particular challenge and you're forcing your eyes to process that particular part, and then deep reading can happen. And I just don't think there's enough research done in that area. And if I had time, I would love to go off and look into that in more detail. But yeah, so my hidden gem is the screen masking tool. I think it is so versatile.
Hurry up, Peter's turn. Quick, it's Peter. And then I think we should make it mad.
Do you want to build the anticipation further, Peter? Do you want mine?
Yeah, you go for yours, because it hasn't been said yet. So let's see if you're going to steal my thunder. Go on then, mate.
No, I'm not going to steal your thunder because I'm going to agree with Danielle.
Okay, yeah, I go through exactly the same way as so many times. Like I love that tool, and it's really unique out there for you guys to have that tool, and it's so simple but so effective.
Yeah, it's been a real winner. Like I said, when I've gone in and modeled like with freedom, right, things like that, and just showing that, it's like suddenly there's children that are going, oh, this is perfect for me, and it's the one that I always see children go back to the most. I suppose it's because it's visual, but like there's so many children that suddenly go, actually, I want it blue, I want it yellow, and you see that kind of spectrum of what they might do with it as well, which is, I always quite enjoy that one.
I saw a school as well, and what they've done was they said that their students actually took that digital strategy of the screen masking and created their own paper version to read with their paper books, because they found the digital tools so powerful. And usually it's the other way around, the paper influences the digital, but here we had them talking and saying, I need this tracking ruler, and making their own so that they could make paper things look like reading right. So yes, it's fab.
So I've got to say, I love it. And from an SEN point of view, I loved what you said about the evidence into reading, in that there's loads of evidence saying paper-based reading's better, but that's if you can read on paper as well, and if that is something you find easy, and it's often overlooked in that research, that is great as long as that works for you. Whereas if you have problems reading, you need another way of doing it. I've got right. So the tool for me, I think, is the one that gets most used across our school from adults, is the picture dictionary. We've got some quite low academic students within our school, so we have visuals that reinforce everything that we write, and we use the picture dictionary for those visuals. So we have consistent visuals across the school in all of our work that we've taken from the Read Write Picture Dictionary. And because we're using that one tool everywhere, it makes sure that those visuals are always the same visuals from class to class across the entire school. So I just think that is I can't claim credit for that one. It was one of our teachers that started using it. And then now it is in our non-negotiables for the school that all of our work has to be reinforced with visuals, and that's what we use to reinforce them.
Do you know, Peter, an interesting bit of information on that? So we have a couple of symbols companies globally that one is one that we license in, and that is the widget symbol library. You'll all know widget symbols, and we've done quite a lot of work with them recently, and like they're making some really big headways into the corporate world, for symbol friendly corporate world.
Wow.
And I was out in the Middle East recently, and we were with Emirates, the airline, and Emirates now are using symbols for navigation. And I know they're working on some very obviously it's commercially sensitive, can't talk about names, but the places like supermarkets using the same symbols that your children will have access to in read and write for that pure consistency in everyday life and world of work. So there's a real movement, because people are identifying with exactly what you say at all levels, because symbols are straightforward and easy to understand for every single one of us. So that's really exciting to hear that, Peter. Nice.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Peter as well. So again, it sounds like a backtrack here slightly, because in our special school, that is our favorite tool. Like, I showed them that, and it was like ideal, because as Peter says, it's something that they were using already.
Mm-hmm.
It's visuals they're already familiar with, so it's perfect. And again, like that was like a real like winner over there. You had to have that visual dictionary. Oh, it's me. I'm waiting for Peter. There you go. So, if you had a magic wand, if you could snap your fingers and think about how we could instantly improve inclusion, what would that one big change be to kind of central government, to across the globe? What would it be to I guess make inclusion more accessible for all?
I'm really interested in this answer, because I have strong feelings on this question. I'm interested to see what you guys say.
I think I might lay you down here, Peter, because it might be super predictable on this, which is exams. Scrap them. And that narrow set of skills, that only reflects on certain individuals with a certain kind of approach to exams. And I know we've got loads of high achievers that are really, really good at exam technique, and I'm never for 1 minute taking anything away from them. But we do not provide an inclusive piece. When we're saying there is, right, we need you to memorize these things and be able to articulate them, and it has to be, by the way, in a handwritten format. Well, unless you got access arrangements, but then you can have dictation, or you can speak to somebody, and it just does not favor inclusion in any shape, manner, or form. I also think it forgets about the whole fact that we are trying to nurture, nourish, and flourish our children in many different ways that may just not be on that examination path, but massively contribute to all of our societies and to themselves and to their families and all of those things. So for me, I think we need assessments, to be clear. We need to know where our children are and how they're progressing. But those high stakes end of terms assessments that our life is built towards, those 27 hours in the case of GCSEs at the end of that year, just still kills me. I wasn't an exam person. I know so many people aren't. My daughter is a super exam person. Everybody's different. That's the point there. But yeah, Peter, so I hope it didn't disappoint you there. But yeah, let's just scrap it all.
I agree more on that
as well. So just in the kind of natural climate of schools really facing these SEND difficulties at the moment, whether that because schools, regardless of opinion, they have to focus on exams in the current climate.
Yeah.
Also, in the current climate, we have a huge issue of SEND. So I wonder if there's a bit of kind of a reflection to be had on those two kind of factors. We're always having to every year focus those kids and get those through the door, but more than ever, SEND has become an issue, and we're still kind of, I won't say teetering around what that looks like. I'm not saying we as a collective here, but
yeah,
the bigger we are still kind of teetering around that. Like at the moment, I feel like.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we talk to schools, and secondary schools, and we go mainstream secondary schools, right? Okay, we're going to start with reading, right? And we have those meetings, and they go, just key stage 3. And you're like, well, just key stage 3. Well, above key stage 3, we're all very busy getting through the GCSE course, and we probably won't have time. And there's that automatic reason not to look at inclusion and not to look at technology in the same way, because to be fair, the system has you in a case where I have a course to deliver, I have got results to achieve, and I've got to get through this. And nobody's blaming any teacher for that. That is the system that's created that. So I totally get it, Matthew. Like, it really is a pressure on time and energy and resources, and it does hold us back. And I think with the supposed SEN review coming up in weeks from now, I think in that and this move to incorporate more and more students in the mainstream, I think the pressures are added, and that's not helped by the current system for sure.
No, I completely agree. And say you put that same setup in a primary setting, and what you talk about Key Stage 4 in that example is the same with like Year 6, right? Like you have this blocker because we have to do certain things.
Yeah.
But then there are still going to be children that need that support and need these certain tools to, you know, to get them by in some cases.
Sure, for sure. Danielle, I'd love to know what you're going to change on the system.
Yeah, no, I'm +1 for the assessments. Definitely. I mean, what gets me is that assessment can sometimes be the tail that wags the dog. Like, what's happening in schools is that the whole learning ecosystem within the classroom is built around what needs to be assessed and evidencing the actual assessment and where the students are, at the risk of then not allowing learning to happen freely. So I'm hearing, for example, some reluctance to use, for example, the prediction tool for the words to be suggested to students, because they'll be able to do that in a writing piece. You know, why give them that support right there? Because they won't be able to use that later. They won't be able to use it in an exam. So why give it to them? You know, and this doesn't make sense to me, because what we're doing here is we're amalgamating assessment and learning, but the two things are separate. The two things are separate processes, and we have to allow learning to happen and then performance to happen in its own space later. But for learning to happen, we have to allow the students to be having access to the tools. We have to allow them to be used as scaffolds, and for the teachers to use them as adaptive teaching methods right there in the moment to actually extend the reach of the teacher in the classroom. But when we don't utilise the technology that's there, what we're doing is we're not making available those supports that the students could have to really support learning and to develop deeper thinking and understanding. And it's not about them being able to use an assessment. They can be used for learning and everyday learning. So for me, I'm always really conscious of the fact that teachers are driven by assessment so much in their classrooms, and they value what's measured. But we've got to value learning as well. We've got to value those moments in the classroom to be free and to enjoy learning, and not think so much about the assessment.
Yeah, it's a really difficult piece at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah. It's the balance you've got to find, and it is just a system that's been around since the 1700s that hasn't really changed. And realistically, in this year, you know, 300 years on, we should really be looking at that system and going, is this 300-year-old system really working for us in the way we need it to for our young people? Because there are so many of young people that are making so many great advancements using these technologies and engaging in ways that aren't necessarily the ways that they're going to be able to in the exams. And it's not even just schools being let down, it's those children being let down by the systems. At that stage, you get you making some really massive progress that then they can't use potentially in the one time they're asked to prove their learning, and the whole system really does need to change on that. I can agree with you.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's about lifelong learning. It's not about just the time in the school. When they leave the school gates, you know, they have to have, you know, tools that are going to support them for life and beyond. And also they have to develop those skills to be able to succeed.
It's really, the tool bit's really important, because I think there's still an aspect where people see it as cheating in some ways, right? Like you still get that comment along those kind of lines. But my challenge has always been, not always been, but like for, you know, especially for the past several years, it's like, so are you telling me you'd never, you know, do a Google check of a spelling, or you never, you know, do a voice note to your friend because, you know, texting is too laborious for you, like labor intensive for you, you know, all these things that we do as adults, and that's completely okay to make our lives more accessible ultimately. But we
quickly there, Matt, because it's not just adults that are saying that. Students adapt so quickly and they know what's being asked of them. And I've had students in the past that when we're trying to get them to use technologies, they see it as cheating, because I might have started working at them at 13 or 14. They've had that massive amount of their education where they've been told the only way to do work correctly is neatly handwritten in a book. And that they understand that as the standard that's set, and they see that as cheating themselves. And it's just as much mindset change with young people and as it is with teachers as well at points.
Yeah, I agree. It's all about mindset, Peter, completely. Like even when we're talking about that example of providing words, the vocabulary, I mean, like, teachers put vocabulary on stickers all around the walls in a room, or they provide it in a book, and that's okay for scaffolding, but provided as technology, and the mindset shift isn't always there to understand that actually this is a more effective and efficient way to provide scaffolding for your students right there in the moment. And then it can be faded, of course. You know, you fade your scaffolding as you go, and it's about having those learning conversations, as you said, Peter, about when to use the technology and when not, and the appropriate use of it.
So let's look to wrap up now. We've hit some highs. We went a little bit low there at one point, so let's bring it back up. Let's end on something proactive. If you were going to give a teacher one bit of advice tomorrow morning, what is one thing they could do to encourage inclusive practice all round? What would that one bit of advice you give them be?
I'm actually going to revisit, Peter, the UDL piece, which is, for me, like, for years and years and years, people come up to me at the end of keynotes and presentations and they go, "Hey, Paddy, what's your one piece of advice?" Like, you get asked that question a lot. And my one piece of advice has always been opportunity, create opportunity. And that's always the blocker. It's like we've always had this fear in technology about letting go. Well, we can't turn this over to the children. We can't let them make choices. Like, that's my rule to do that. And providing opportunity is it. But to encapsulate that, I think I'll go back to the UDL piece, which is choice and voice is so powerful and so important. If you can just encourage kids that they have an opportunity in your classroom to choose tools or supports that actually help them uniquely in their learning, and to do it in their own way to support them, I think that's the biggest fundamental shift you could ever make. And if you do it in one lesson, or you do it in all your lessons, or if you're primary all day long with your class, I think that's of fundamental importance. I think we all think as educators that this technology thing is going to add to your plate. Like, it's more stuff. I think about it the other way around and go, this is about helping me clear my plate a bit faster, because I'm giving my students agency, I'm giving them choice and voice, and they're driving things. And I think that's a really important consideration. So choice and voice.
Yeah, for me, it's, if we were thinking about one piece of advice to get started for creating inclusive learning environments, for me, it's about thinking about, say, one learner who you really want to support, and just starting with one person. And then once you start there, then looking at other learners and seeing where the barriers can be broken down as well. And when you see that impact, sharing that impact with colleagues, and it can have that ripple effect beyond that one particular student. But I think starting small is okay. Sometimes we see the vision, we can see perhaps what leadership want us to try to achieve, we can see what other trusts are achieving, and we want to do it all and do it all today. But I think starting small and choosing one small goal can really help break that down and make it achievable, and start there and then incrementally build upon that each step of the way, and you'll get there.
Brilliant, guys. Thank you so much for that. And I think that's really impactful. Danielle, I've got to say, that's exactly how I explain it to people that are new. We can all think of that one child, you know, where this would change their life, and then you can roll forwards from there. And then that's where we get to those, you know, equity-based classrooms, essentially, from there.
For sure.
Brilliant. Well, that is it for this episode. Thank you very much to Paddy and Danielle from Everway. Matt, thanks as always for being here with me for our second podcast. please feel free to check out the third coming to you soon from the classroom.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye.